The Honorable Brother, the Revolutionary yourself, Darius Lockhart, and I'm here to tell you to watch Powerbombshells every Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern on the Fight Game Media YouTube channel. That's right, every Sunday at 1 p.m., and that's on time, every time, because when we stand together, what time is it? That's right, it's nation time.
Hello, welcome to Powerbombshells, episode 135. I'm Mel, and
I'm not Sam.
That is not Sam. I'm sitting on Sam's side of the screen this week because we've got a very special honorary broad filling in for Sam this week, and that
two people to fill her
role. That's what I was gonna say. Is I had to go big, and I can't go bigger than getting the boss of this place and having Mr. BJ Bethel on a little bit later on in the show. But guys, it's Double G has joined me to help me make a nice, fun show for Sam this week, and welcome.
Thank you for having me. I miss Sam already. Let's just say that, because I know that you all have cultivated like this really cool audience, and so I'm sure that audience misses Sam, seeing Sam as well. But hopefully we can make it sort of interesting and keep her seat warm to when she is ready to come back, and it'll be like nothing was missed. So that's what my hope is in these this next hour or so that I'm here.
Yeah, I think I just want to do her proud. I'm going to do you proud, Sam. I promise. I think she'll be happy. And I have to point this out when Garrett and I were joking, or talking about this, not joking, but talking about this. My hat here, guys, is super dope. Miguel R., who is a friend of our community at Fight Game Media, he's in our Discord. He's a very, very special part of our community as far as I'm concerned, was vacationing with his family and thought to buy me this super dope luchador hat, which is super nice, and a couple of little luchador magnets that are like, I don't know, for me it was like they were stuck together. And I didn't realize there were two. And then as I was moving here, I was like, oh, there's two. Like me and Sam. So I've got them up behind me, and big shout out, Miguel. This was so nice. Like, you don't have to, this is my first official from the community hat that I've worn that someone's actually sent me, and it's super special, and you didn't have to be doing that. Whoa.
Hopefully at some point you get to meet Miguel in person, because he is a class act individual, just the best person. He and his wife Denise are so fun to be around and to hang out with. So
I hope so. Great contributor to our community, and good job, Dazzy. You got the baseball cap. It was a little specific, but we're good. I think that's good. And we got, let's see. Dazzy says, with Sam away, 2 honorary broads must be me today. However, I'll be using a filter on my face to look like Garrett Gonzalez. Oh, wow. Interesting. Oh, it's like MXM Collection's been doing with their silly gimmick there. That I'm not sure how I feel
is Daz is in this chat a lot, right?
He is. Oh, yeah.
So Dazza and I go way, way back because of the F4W convention. And there was one year, we're talking like probably.
Is that this the only way to end the feud? That is a series of 3 golf, bowling, and laser tag. Is that what this is related to?
We're probably talking like over 10 years ago. We all played Kiss mini golf, which I don't know if it exists in Las Vegas anymore, but Dazza and I tied for first at the F4W convention Kiss mini golf thing. So I always remind him of that we need to break that, and we need to find the true winner.
The one true Kiss mini golf person, human, alive. That's amazing. See, I love that the F4W, one day I'll make it out. It's just on a weird weekend. And it's, of course, they always do it on like, hey, the most expensive weekend ever. Fortunately, there's like good flying from Detroit, but someday I will get there. I've also thought about going overseas to do it just because I'm close to friends, but I wouldn't get to meet you necessarily at that one because you usually do Vegas. So
Yeah, we do need to figure something out to try and get
Fight Game Media Con.
just just to get us all in a similar
There's gotta
place.
be a central location.
Yeah, around an event like AEW's running Globe Field or whatever, wherever the Rangers play next year.
Cool.
Like I want to go to that, and I know there's a nice contingent of folks in Texas who we talk to generally, so that would be fun. But I don't know, Texas is kind of the middle, but will people want to go to Texas at that time? It's going to be so hot, so that's kind of the thing.
Hot's relative to the Midwesterner. I know it's going to be like even hotter because I have an artisan friend that they're based out of Texas and we talk often, and it's like, but I still want to get down there because they're supposed to have the best Ren Fair in America. So I would have all the reason, like I'm on that. We've decided that we're going to hit as many Ren Fairs as we can ever. It's kind of like, check them off. Let's go. Because we've been to a bunch now. And so it's something around that would be cool. Or maybe just Sam's Town is kind of easy to get to. Like Charlotte's really easy to get to. And it's like an easy, low-key, not overly expensive area. And we could almost definitely get a wrestling show potentially.
And you get to have Bojangles, which is a big thing. And there's I forget the other place that's like the drive-through. It's called I forget. It's a really catchy name, like a drive-through spot that people love. I've only been to that area 2 times in my life, and it's because my wife's in-laws are out there. So I've been to it's close to Charlotte. It's a town called Gastonia, but it's a really cool area to go out there. So I don't know.
Texas is pretty direct. But I mean, that's Flair country. So, but as Sam would say, I don't know if she'd want us invading her town. We should definitely invade somebody else's town. Yeah. And then we could get Ryan Frederick on board. But we digress.
Kevin Ely is close by.
Oh,
I don't know how close by. Also, Richard Becerra, I believe, is in San Antonio. I know Texas is giant, so I don't know how.
I love the fight game the fight game people like this. Sam and I talk about it a lot. It's a great community, and I mean, you're like the father of that. Your dad of Fight Game Media, and we just have such a fun community, and we've like this fun group of people that show up every week and send me hats, which is so nice.
I was talking to JD and Mike, who
we're not feuding with in any way.
And we were doing stuff with them, and then they kind of went on their own. They're now on Voices of Wrestling, but they also have their own Patreon and such. And I was talking to them because now I know this is a little bit of a sensitive thing to some folks about these Observer Hall of Fame ballots and such. But, like there's like a lot of people who now have ballots who started with us. And Fight Game for me goes back all the way to like 2009 or something like that. So like having that lineage back to there, and then kind of thinking like, oh, we had a lot of really good people like doing stuff, so that means something to me. It's more that, I mean, that's why it was created, right? It's to give people a platform to talk and to do their podcasts and to do some writing, and it was never about like growing this into like this giant ecosystem or whatever, but the community aspect of it was definitely part of it. Like it's more important to me about the community thing than anything else, because it's kind of where I come from in career wise. So, but I'm just happy to see that people still enjoy doing stuff, and we have this little community here, and we have the Discord. We used to have the Facebook group. It's probably exists in some form, but I'm not on Facebook anymore.
Group. Oh, Meta, just do better, Meta.
Yeah, I don't know. I somehow got kicked off for no reason. A reason that I don't know.
it's tricky with the Facebook because some people only connect there. Like there's a lot of Midwesterners that's their website around this area. And so like, that's what they use for their websites. So for that, in that value, like our local, like wrestling city championship, like that's their base platform that they use for social. So it's like it's worthwhile still to some degree, but also it's a big pain in the a-hole because you get the situations like you've gotten taken over. I had friends get hacked by crypto peddlers. It's like, yeah, these are people. These are not people that would be trying to sell me crypto. It's about as far away as you could get from what these people do. They make creme brulees at Ren fairs, guys. Like this is a hack. And I also like it because it's like your coaching tree is what I think of. Because as someone that's a little coaching / sports backgrounded, mostly it's like Garrett's coaching tree.
Yeah, I just like the idea of giving people opportunity because a lot of times people they want to do it. Like let's start, we'll bring up Paul Fontaine. Paul Fontaine, I've known Paul Fontaine for a long time now. And if you asked him, would he want to do a podcast? He would say yes, like 1,000 times yes, going back many years. But the whole idea of, okay, how do I do it? Mm-hmm. How do I actually distribute it? What service do I like? That's the part of it for him. That's just like, okay, I can't, like, it's just too many things involved. So if I can handle that for him and I can handle the editing and I can handle the uploading and give him that opportunity, like, why not? Like, that's where I go like, okay, I can do this and I can make someone happy. And then he can get his stuff out there and maybe be a little bit of a bigger voice that he wants to be. I'm just using him as an example, but that's kind of like how I saw all of it. So similarly to
that's us.
you and Sam, like
it's
just
exactly
like,
us. I mean,
like, why not? Like, let's do it.
I think it's super interesting. We always call you, I jokingly call you all the time the podcast matchmaker because it's been shocking over the last couple of years to learn that the people that are on this network didn't know each other. Like me and Sam didn't know each other from anything. And that you just went, those two people would work together really well. I've just got this thing. Like I was shocked to know that Kevin and James had never met each other before. I was shocked to find out that Mike and JD only met through, like, that's crazy because you look at the chemistry between all of us and the amount of like respect I have for Sam and where this show has grown to. I mean, with our community and the people that show up every week. And I mean, people actually like asking for our opinion, which is still like a weird thing where it's like, whoa, people are looping us in on big issues right now. Like that's
they want to hear what you think about X.
Crazy.
So, and about that, like, now some larger networks cannot afford to do this, but we are small. And when you are small, you got to be able to move quick. And so I think of everything as an experiment. We have not made sure we have not like hit all 100% on all of them. So Keela, who has been on your show a few times.
Yeah.
We paired her originally with a friend of Justin Nipper's. His name was Andy. I don't remember Andy's last name. And this is not a diss at Andy. This is
just didn't work.
It didn't work as well as we thought it was, but also Andy, like, he had other stuff going on in his life so that he couldn't be as into it. And so when we're like, okay, who do we pair Keela up with? And thanks to JD, we found Scott Young, Salty Scott. And Salty Scott does not fit the template necessarily of how I view wrestling. Salty Scott is very much I love WWE and I'm going to prove my love for WWE. So thus he does the WWE podcast with Keela, but Keela she's like the leader of that show. She's the host. Yep. She watches AEW. She watches more than just WWE. She enjoys WWE as well. She enjoys wrestling. So they have a unique chemistry. And Scott brings a lot of the humor to that show just by being himself.
Yes.
And like, if I just had to independently find someone to pair with Keela, I'm not sure I would have picked him, but because of the connection to JD, I was like, okay, let's give him a shot. And I enjoy him. I mean, he also frustrates the hell out of me on social media because he's like one of those tribalistic people sometimes. But at the same time, like, they do a good show. Now, trying to get that show to more listeners is hard, just because everybody covers WWE. Everybody and their mother
Yeah.
covers WWE. So you kind of get lost in the shuffle, but I still want their voice. Two people who are African American. I think Scott might also be I think he might be African American and Caucasian together, but they provide an experience for people who don't look through that lens. And I really like about that show as well. Not that everything has to be racially divided, but to have that perspective. I am biracial myself, so I sort of look at things that way. And so I like that pairing now. How do we get more people to listen to them? Maybe we're not the perfect place for them, but I think they really do a really good job. And that is an experiment that worked versus the previous experiment with Keela that didn't work as well. But you just keep trying, and
Right.
Thankfully you and Sam just really liked each other from the get-go. So you guys were going to make it work, as much as you could. And it just turned out that you guys have been doing this now. How many years?
This was 135. I think we're going on our third WrestleMania together coming up this year. So, I mean, which I kind of mark it by, because our first show was, we had to make sure Sam actually she was the one who reminded me, she's like, that you didn't actually get honorary broad officially bestowed on you, because you shows that were moderated for some of the people that were still here, or that are here from the beginning. You guys who were doing it before it was cool, like, you helped us out the first couple episodes. But I mark it by, we did that Revolution post show. And we did a Spaces with Keela as one of our first things that kind of,
when we were doing Spaces,
maybe in the ether somewhere, in the internet ether somewhere. But and I may have even downloaded, like, I tended those days to rip the audio from them, so it was pretty good. But that
do people like the Spaces?
What I mark we have a birthday, but we do have our birthday celebration, and our dog, the Powerbombshell dog. I don't think we ever landed on a name, but anyway, go ahead.
No, I was saying, do people enjoy Spaces? Because I see someone do it really, really well. Backup Hangman does it like tremendously well. I know BJ likes Spaces. Maybe not that, like, we do video, so we don't really need it, but Spaces may seem more intimate to some people, and to kind of check in. I don't know. Maybe we could do more of that, but if anybody wanted to do a space on like the channel or something, it'd be interesting.
He's BJ's been, I think, experimenting with it just to see. I mean, because he tries to, he keeps catching me on off times where I would actually jump in. It's just, but I get what he's trying to kind of do, because there's so much going on, and he's covering, obviously, the Janel Grant lawsuit and all of the things that we've been talking about regularly. And he's one of the guys, like, I have bookmarked for my notes. Like, it's the trifecta, and all their, ads and everything kind of bookmarked for the thing. And it's like, I can understand where he might want to talk in real time sometimes because look at what happened Monday. Like,
yep.
And that was by pure just randomness that I happened to log on to Twitter at that moment when, like, that dropped, and we were all sort of chit-chatting, and it was like, oh, what just happened here? Like, did they really just put out a "don't look over here" tweet? Why would they do that? And you have got to be, like, so sick of talking about this.
Yeah, Vince McMahon, that documentary, to cover it the way that we did, Dave and I, was a lot of work. Like, I literally had to take a half a day off of work of my real job to cover it in the way that he wanted to. It was so originally we didn't have a screener copy of the thing, so it was going to be like I was probably going to stay up till midnight on Tuesday, watch the first episode, and then spend the first half day of Wednesday watching the rest of it, which is why I took that day off. But we got a screener copy on Tuesday, so we were able to watch episodes 1 through 4 on Tuesday, which then became my half day off. And then we immediately recorded, but I couldn't post the audio until the thing was out, so we were embargoed is the term. And then the next morning I watched the last 2 episodes, and then we were able to do a show later that day as well. So it was a lot of work, and for a journalist it's a lot of work, but for someone who's doing this as a hobby, it just is like a crazy amount of work. And so, but I have some flexibility with work, and I have a specific process in which I can do this stuff. And, I've been doing it for years now. So, it's very, people don't understand when I tell them this, but, I say, I'm not watching for entertainment. I'm watching so that I can discuss it. So I'm watching it through a critical lens so that I can discuss it. And I'm watching it for specific points to talk about. But if someone said, "Hey, did you enjoy the Vince McMahon doc?" I'd be like, enjoy? Like, I didn't even watch it thinking of whether it was enjoyable or not. Like, I watched it as if I was studying for a test to have on it. So that's how I have to do it in order to get through that stuff, in order to have the critique or the point or the questions. Because like a lot of times when I do those shows with Dave, the questions that I ask him, I already know what he's going to say.
Of course.
But the audience,
you've probably spent more time with him this week than you do with your actual family.
almost. But
close.
like when I ask him a question, it is more for the audience to hear him cook. It is not about me. Sometimes I'm generally curious because maybe something comes up and I'm like, I wonder what he thinks. And so then, I am part of the audience in that way. And the reason why I can do the show that way is because I am also the biggest fan of that show, going back to when they first started. Now, it wasn't always Wrestling Observer Radio.
Right.
It was Brian doing Figure 4 and bringing Dave on. And even previously to that, it was Iata and Wrestling Observer Live. But because I listened to every single thing that Brian and Dave have done together, I am the audience that they are talking to. So then I can lean into what I would want to hear them talk about when I ask Dave questions. So I think that's what enables me to do that show in the way that I do it with him, because I come from the audience. I am a subscriber to that website. So that's kind of how I think about it. But in this sense, you just really have to wind him up and let him cook, because he is the person who knows the most about Vince McMahon, even more so than people in WWE. They don't know Vince McMahon that well because of the conversations he's had, because of the coverage, because of all the history that he's researched about Vince. Maybe Reisman may know a good amount because she did the book on him, but secondary to Dave, he just knows so much about him, and he's had so many conversations with him, and he's still covering Vince really closely today, because he has that knowledge and that relationship with Vince and WWE. So he's got stuff still today that that is pretty much only him that has that information. So it's a fascinating thing. If you're a fan of wrestling history, Vince McMahon is the single most important person, and at the same time, he is going out on the most vile note possible, and you want to see him get his comeuppance if in fact these are the things that he did. So whether or not justice will prevail, we will see. I am hopeful that Janel gets what she really wants out of this, and I am not going to dismiss her if she does get bought out. Like if that is what she wants out of this, then great. If she really does want this thing to go to trial, I'm hopeful that she gets her shot at that too. But the way that this story is ending, I wouldn't say it's unpredictable, because when the Cosby stuff was happening, I asked Dave, I was like, okay, Cosby, if people are getting Cosby, what about Vince? And Dave's answer was always, Vince had people sign NDAs. And I was like, okay, but people are going to talk. And he's like, yep, people might talk, but that's always how he thought Vince protected himself. And then we saw what happened.
Well, and NDAs are becoming thinner and thinner every day because they are preventing people from actually working. So those kinds of laws changing are going to go further for anybody that's in a situation potentially like Janelle's, which, I mean, for me, and I watched it similarly because I know Sam's going to want to kind of break it down a little bit, even though it's going to be a little later, but for the same sort of reasons, is that I would have watched it anyways, like a fan of wrestling. I would have just watched it. And
it was also a WWE history documentary.
Yes. And I'm big into the history stuff. I love reading that. It's really interesting that Shoemaker was in there, because that was actually, my first wrestling book was Have a Nice Day. My second wrestling book was The Squared Circle. And it was a friend, I sort of asked him, like, what are the books? And so it was like, here, I had read Have a Nice Day just because everyone knew that one. And then McFoley, which is why I was obviously disappointed last week by the comments that he made. It's such a bummer to me. But and it was Squared Circle and the wrestling were the two that were. So it was interesting to see him on there also as kind of another person that was in the truth-keeping portion of the programming.
Another book that you may really enjoy, and you can probably find it for super cheap. It's a book called Sex, Lies, and Headlocks by Shauna Sale, who was writing for ESPN at the time, I believe. But Shauna Sale covers a lot of the Vince stuff. He covers a lot of the scandal stuff. And at that point in time, it was almost like if you were around in the 90s and you saw Phil Mushnick kind of go after Vince, then there was a time period where nobody touched wrestling because it was kind of uncool. And then the Monday Night Wars heated up. And so post WWE just kind of becoming so much more popular than it ever was, then Shauna Sale wrote this book about like all of the bad stuff and then the rise and that. I think you would really like that book. It's a little old now. It's probably like 20 years old at this point, but I remember that being pretty good.
I recommend to people, because I read that over the last year, I believe. I got it on my library. The other Muchnick that didn't get mentioned in the Muchnick is, and you turned me on to Irvin Muchnick. Let's try that again. Easy for me to say. Irvin Muchnick's blog. Well, I went looking and found his book, Wrestling Babylon, which was published. I went and made sure it was published in 2007. And that was like Dark Side of the Ring before Dark Side of the Ring was a thing. That book is a collection of his articles, and they could have taken, I wouldn't be surprised too if those guys were smart enough. Like, they probably pulled a bunch of that stuff right out of there.
Oh, I'm sure they did. Absolutely.
It's literally a Dark Side of the Ring, but he's got such, and I've been recommending it to Sam because it's a quick read. It's only about 200 pages, and his voice, the way that he writes, is so excellent. He has such a great way of just calling out people's BS. And I enjoy like sports reporters that are critical and actually journalistic, but I also kind of like a little bit of like no BS, hard hitting, sort of like, this guy's a scumbag and this guy's a scumbag. Like, call it what it is. He's a scumbag.
If you didn't know anything about Vince and you watch this Netflix documentary, he comes across as a scumbag.
Yes.
He cannot avoid coming across in that way. And I had this thought as I was watching it. like, because I kept coming back to, why does he want to do this? Why do you want to expose yourself as this person? And Dave kept saying to me, and this was after the whole thing was filmed. He said Vince's legacy is very important to him as he gets older, and he never got the credit because wrestling doesn't get the credit.
Right.
And so you watch that and you go, well, if he was trying to create this portrayal of himself as this, creative genius or this entrepreneur or whatever, he did a real poor job if that was his goal in this documentary. Now, we don't know what they didn't show.
Right.
We didn't know what they cut out. And there could have been stuff where, maybe he's not as vile as he comes across, but I don't know, man. Like that was bad strategy by him, but it doesn't really matter because the Wall Street Journal breaks that story anyway. And we learn all these things about him anyway. And we probably have the same opinion, even if the Netflix documentary doesn't come out. So
my feeling on this documentary, on the surface, just as and you guys talked about it Friday in your kind of a wrap-up show, and it's your normal Friday show with Dave, which is what I latched onto initially a lot. And that's, essentially how I got to know you online. You guys really covered it all over my notes. I had who leaked the email.
Yeah.
All over my notes, all throughout the thing. It kept coming back to me, and who leaked the email? Who did it? And I even my little investigative brain is like, I bet if you poured through the files and you did tons of research and you had the time, you could, because BJ and John Pollock and Brandon Thurston did figure out names and did ask Ann Callis, are these the names? And she said, yes, those are the names. And we've discussed that many times on here. But they couldn't, because of the deal with Netflix in January, they couldn't not show this, and they couldn't make a puff piece. I feel like they made the perfect cover your ass docuseries where if whatever happens in the future, because it's on a stay for the federal indictment for the federal government, because they've got something that they're doing, whether it relates to the finances, which they were playing with stockholder money, which he got really narcissistic and was playing with stockholder money, which market makers hate. They do not like it when you F with their money. And there could just be trafficking. There could be a legitimate, maybe there's a connection to some of the other cases in that Southern District that are similar crimes. And so I think they did a thing where so that when they launch in the next year, they can be like, well, we told you what he was. We showed you. It's right there for you to see. To me, it was very at the end of it, I was like, they made a plausible deniability docuseries here. They went in just hard enough so that at some time in the future, they can, in their statements that they're going to make that are going to be the same political platitudes that you always get, they're just going to be like, well, we showed you what he was. We said all that in the documentary. It was right there on all the subtitles and stuff told you that we were in the midst of this and we knew it, and that he walked away from he was the one that stopped doing the interviews. And so they can launch Raw and they can be I think it's a strategy. So because I'm in the obvious that they didn't go in hard enough, but I didn't expect them to.
Mm-hmm. I didn't either. And
if you did, sorry, but really?
Well, for one, it's Netflix.
Right.
What does Netflix want? Netflix wants minutes viewed. That is the statistic that they publish every 6 months. How many billions of minutes did this thing get? And this is Bridgerton is number one or whatever. That's how they show their success. So ultimately, they want the minutes. And how do you get people to watch a wrestling documentary as a mainstream piece of media, not by catering to hardcore wrestling fans. That is not how you do it. That might be how Tony Khan would have done this documentary, by the way. Like, and I would like to see that cut of it. Like, I would love to see like the hardcore wrestling cut of this doc. But when you hire the Tiger King guy, you are aiming for a particular audience, right? And you're going to have BJ come on later. And this is the crux of our debate: is BJ is a hardcore reporter. So when he views something through that lens, he wants the details. They didn't go hard enough on this. And as a media person, I go, yeah, I never expected them to, because why would they? They have so many things to think about with this relationship with WWE. However, I think there were some Easter eggs, or there were some clues in there that were there for a reason. And the one that stands out to me is they wanted you to look into the Sable and Vince McMahon relationship.
Yeah.
They really wanted you to do that after the doc was over. They weren't going to tell you what to look for. But if you put connect the little dots, you're like, okay, Sable was introduced, and they didn't tell this part, but she's introduced into the wrestling business because she's married to Mark Merrow, Johnny B. Bad, wild man Mark Merrow. So she's introduced into the business through Mark Merrow. Now, if you know anything about this story, she and Mark Merrow did not last very long after she was introduced to pro wrestling. The age-old story, right, of couples having a hard time existing. Not anymore, generally. I think we have a lot of really successful wrestling couples now, but really hard back in those days. And so she becomes in mere months, she becomes a much bigger star than Mark Merrow, and she's not even wrestling yet. She's just a valet, what they used to call a valet.
Yep.
But she's actually getting involved in stuff. So then she becomes like one of the bigger stars in the company. They have her start wrestling. She's not very good, but it really doesn't matter. And the second that she gets super big, of course there's a contract situation. And then she's gone. So much so that I think she's still under contract, and she shows up on Nitro in the crowd. And I think very soon WWE's like, nope, she can't. So they got in trouble for doing that. And then she's just gone for a while. And then they showed this part. She files a lawsuit against WWE for sexual harassment. They bring her back, and Stephanie McMahon tells that story on their television. And at that point in time, now you can look into the rumors, you can read stories. At that point in time, I think people think, without being there, that she and Vince had a relationship at that time after coming back.
Yeah.
And then Brock Lesnar and Sable get together soon thereafter. So they're telling us there's stuff here that existed in 2000, in the late 80s, 90s, early 2000s, that kind of connect dots to what was happening in the early 2020s with Janel Grant. So that is up. They left that to the audience to kind of put those dots together. I'm not sure they even could do it themselves, because pro wrestling is so inside.
Yeah.
But like, I liked those kind of things that they did, because like you said, they weren't going to Irv Mushnick this thing and say, Vince is bad, and here are the 6 episodes to tell you why he was bad. They were creating a history of WWE, a history of Vince McMahon, and we're going to give you this information and you decide kind of thing.
Yes. That was exactly my feeling on the entire. I mean, they went in harder than I expected, but really I understood when I was watching it, like, sort of, to me, it felt like, okay, well, let's get ahead of this thing. And again, with the good old fashioned plausible deniability, which is like, well, people have been telling you, we told you that he was like, he told you. I mean, he couldn't help himself. And you said it earlier, but there were times where he could not help himself. And that's why, like, at some point he just ended up walking out, because it's like he knew he had exposed himself at some points, and it was like, I'm out. I'm not doing this anymore. And I mean, that's honestly my favorite part. And I probably should have done a spoiler alert, but it was in the thing. So, I mean, sorry, Brad. I can throw up the banner if you guys want me to. It's our favorite thing here. But so spoiler, way too late. Spoiler alert if you haven't watched the Vince McMahon doc, because I'm about to spoil the ending. Just primarily because I enjoyed a great deal Bruce Pritchard's reaction, his butthurt reaction to the whole a hit job. And you guys said it about 1 million times this week. I mean, if you had a crypto for every time you had to say, if you're in the one camp, you're going to go this way, and if you're in the other camp, you're going to go this way. That's the truth. I propose a third camp, which is they're launching WWE on their own network in 2 months, 3 months, basically. They can't bury the guy that created the product and completely, but they at least have to be like, but we told you, it's right there for you to watch. You're not smart enough to connect the dots. It's on you.
I wonder if Nick Khan would have been happier if they went harder on Vince. Because if you see today's WWE strategy when it comes to Vince, it is distancing themselves as far as humanly possible for him, and basically saying that with Vince gone, all the bad stuff is gone. So if you turn Vince into the only bad thing about WWE, I wonder if Nick Khan would have thought, hey, they could have gone harder on him, and that makes us look better. The new regime, us turning over that page, and Triple H as well. Like, I don't imagine. I mean, maybe Triple H and Vince are in some sort of communication. They are family, but at the same time, Triple H is in this role, and the partial reason he is excelling in the way that he is because he's not Vince, and he doesn't do things. Well, he does some things like Vince, but he doesn't do the Vince playbook. He is a little bit he's setting things up and not all of a sudden canceling them, and or displaying his emotions about people on his television. Right? Triple H has distanced himself from that kind of booking, and Triple H is really like
for
a
the
hero.
most part. They did have the recent and sorry, but that was just a straight up, like,
you're talking about the text.
They were trying to make a storyline out of this situation, and Vince is supposed to be gone and everything else, but Triple H learned from Vince, and you're not going to disconnect those two for me. It's not.
That was so weird. It was so weird.
Learned from, and I mean, they got blowback and they pulled it down, and they.
I almost feel like they didn't even get a lot of blowback. But did they get a lot of blowback? I didn't sense that they got a ton of blowback.
They got
I don't think people were smart enough.
A small niche group of, and I mean, maybe it's just because of the part of the socials that I roll in is that because they did stop that storyline.
Yes.
And they wouldn't do that if there wasn't somebody saying, and Sam is covering it for Wrestling Inc. Otherwise, we wouldn't. I mean, we don't generally watch WWE, so we don't, dump on it or anything else. We've covered Janel. We've been covering her story because we want her to be, and we want her to have somewhere to be her. Like, we want her name to be said and these things to be acknowledged. And hopefully they, get past this stay and they go to court. But I don't know. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. I want to jump to some of these comments here, but let's see. So where you said that, let's see, Daza said, Oh, that's so sorry about that one. But Lady B made a point earlier about her. She has friends who are non-wrestling fans that finished watching it, and they were horrified by a lot of things, but especially the Owen Hart story. The decision doesn't age well at all, and they didn't even like scratch the surface of that for real. I mean, you have to go to the Dark Side of the Ring episodes to really get a picture of how bad that was. And Brad, this is exactly right. Is the bad man gone BS line. But Hunter learned from Vince. And it's a friend of mine had me go back and watch 92. We were watching Superstars and stuff, and I was watching him cut promos back then, and I'm like, I see it. Like, you could see it back then. I'm gonna bring in our third guest though, real quick here before I jump back to some of these comments, because again, to replace Sam, we don't need one good guest. We need two good guests. We need two especially good honorary broads. So I'd like to welcome to the show, Mr. BJ Patel. How's it going?
Thanks for having me.
Welcome
I feel
back.
like I don't know what else to say to an introduction like that. It's the truth, but it's true. You need Garrett and me to try to fill. No, we can't fill Sam's shoes. We can only replace her feet in those shoes for for 1 week.
You like wear them for a minute and help me
Yes,
out.
we're kind of like my 9-year-old trying to wear my Nikes around the house, and he's running full speed, and the dog's chasing him, and shoes are going everywhere. That's the metaphor I'm thinking of.
It's perfect because that's exactly right. Sam. We love Sam. So obviously, all right, we've marked out about Sam. We'll probably do it more because she's been covering this stuff too, and she did actually get an article out this week as well. But I'm gonna actually, Garrett, I forgot to ask you the most important question of the week that was on Inquiring Minds want to know. What was it like watching Dave interviewed with the worst version of his background ever? Like, I mean,
I wonder if that was like a green screen or something, because like that he traveled for those interviews. Okay, so for the most part, I think he was really nervous, like when we started watching it, about how he was going to come across, because as somebody said that he reminded them, actually, it might have been Lady B. Shout out to Lady B. She had said in a chat that he came across as the fact checker in the Kamala Donald Trump debates. And so when she said that, I was like, that's exactly. And with that comes heat from the side that you are fact checking.
Of course.
So I'm sure he was really worried about the portrayal, because a lot of times when you are the smart person and you are the honest person, you can kind of come across a little nerdy and a little like over the top and more well actually than maybe you intended. It's based on the cut. It's based on how you are presented. He was really happy with how he was presented. My favorite part of it was they're talking about the 92 stuff, and there's like a 5-second clip of a young Dave Meltzer on some sort of interview, and he made like an audible noise that is not distinguishable for like a human voice, because he was so surprised. And I looked at him and he was just like, he did not expect that. He did not expect to see the mullet flowing as it was during that time. Because you got to think about that. That clip was probably over 30 years ago. So he hasn't seen that version of himself in quite a long time. So it was like a yelp. It was like a dog yelping is the noise that he sort of made. So, but when you watch stuff like that with him, his color commentary, like you think of like a director's commentary, and it's very much what it is like when you watch stuff like him, because he's going to call out the BS, and he's going to go, oh, wow, I didn't expect them to say those things or cover or say that exactly. Or, okay, they have this timeline wrong. And, they had a lot of timelines wrong in that. And it was almost like they were trying to cut things in and then shove them into similar scandals, but the timing was a little off. And again, they were putting it in that way for us to decide what we wanted to. They weren't overtly telling us this is bad and this is related to this and this is why this happened. They were laying it out so that the viewer could sort of figure out where things were going. But I think he was really happy with his portion of the thing. And you know who else's portion we were really happy with? And you could never know that with who he's arguing in Twitter with these days. But Bischoff, we both thought Bischoff was awesome in this thing. Now
Bischoff was amazing in this, and I was glad to see him because I mean he was really speaking truth to PS for a lot of the. Bischoff was in AWA when a lot of this was going on at the latter end of it, and so he knows. And I mean, the fact they were cutting back and forth, and they got the. I mean, I don't know if this helps Bischoff with WWE at all, but I think it probably helps his legacy a little bit. The fact that, you know, he was saying, yeah, we beat him for 83 weeks. We didn't do anything that they didn't do. Fact is they had to amp up their version of their program to really kind of change things around and keep themselves in business. And I thought his portion, I thought him and Tony Atlas and Dave were the three by far the best ones on the show. Just because Tony was just like, yeah, we treated women like, I mean, he was kind of honest about how the locker room was back in the 80s. Yeah, I thought Bischoff really, I was glad to see him stand up for his own legacy on this. I mean, he's kind of folded it. I mean, obviously his legacy's mixed, very mixed, especially these days. But I was glad to see him kind of stand up and say, yeah, we kicked our butt. This is why. And, you know, all this whining about rating talent. And then he's like, I knew we made him sweat with the Billionaire Ted skits. And you could just tell that, oh. And then they showed Ted Turner watching him laughing. I'm like, I'm sure Vince is going to watch this. You know he is somewhere. And that's going to kill him. That Ted just thought they were something to laugh at and then went on with his life, you know.
That guy was, I mean, I've read like not the book specifically on him, but I've read about him in other business books where, because he was such a force in media that, I mean, he can't be ignored in like the scheme of market economics and all kinds of things. So he's constantly brought up in books. And it's like the idea that like that would bother you, like that would get it. Vince is the pettiest person. Like he's so petty. He's so like, you know, that again, like you saw the Bruce Pritchard reaction where he was like, "I was total crap. I was total hit down."
then the little the next day.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was great.
Where was Bruce after? Where's Bruce the next day?
But Dave, they actually did, and I loved it because when they were talking about the Pontiac Silverdome stuff, because that was hilarious to me, and that's always been hilarious to me. The WrestleMania, it was like. This was one of the first things when I started learning about like insider stuff about wrestling. This was like one of the first things you read about is WrestleMania 3 and Andre and especially now I'm living here. It was an even bigger deal. I actually know people. I, go down I'm up at the pub with people that were at that event, I mean, they were there because they've been here their whole lives in the Detroit area. So, but just when they kept going back and forth to him and he was like, no, that number is total bullshit. It's just bullshit. But they kept that consistency with how they had Dave in there. And I mean, again, Shoemaker, and he's fine. Dave, because of we can never argue the depth of Dave's knowledge on just about anything. I've read many, people, all the books you read about North American wrestling, they reference Dave. It is what it is. Like, Irv in his book talks about Dan quotes Dave a bunch of times. It's the one that was he's the only person in history that booked his own divorce. Was one of my favorite Dave quotes that I ever heard. Was from back in the Vince days of doing exactly that sort of thing, where he essentially was like pitting couples against each other. Or it's.
Look at Lady B's comment about Ted Turner.
Any man.
And I'll tell a quick story about
This one
that.
here is that any
So-
man who can pull Jane Fonda gets points in my book. Amen, sister. That's actually yes.
So I'm reading the 1989 Observers for the Observe This project that I'm doing. And in one of the issues, I think it's in August, Dave writes, and if you think about how the Observer was written back then, it's on a typewriter, right? So he writes his lead story, and then he writes everything under it. But sometimes news breaks while he's still writing it. So then he's got to write something at the very end of it. And so this is like at the very end of it. And he wrote that he got a phone call from somebody from Star Magazine who wanted a scoop from him on which wrestler Jane Fonda was dating. And as it turns out, she's not dating a wrestler. She's dating the guy who bought the entire company. But that's a little gem of a line at the end of one of his Observers. It's in the book that they put out of all the issues. It's still in there.
Fantastic. I just love that. I love the idea of Delsa says here that even a lot of Dave's enemies have been positive about his role in the documentary and the docuseries. That's good to hear. I mean, haters gonna hate, man. I mean, I know Garrett, you deal with this every week. BJ, you deal with this every week because you're telling truths to people. Sam, I see her comments. I mean, because I'm not I'm sort of the just the hobbyist here. I don't get as much heat as she does, but oh my God, in her comments.
And can I give Sam a shout out? Because I am not obtuse to the fact that because she is a woman, she's going to get it harder from male wrestling fans just because of that fact. And the way that she deals with it is actually pretty awesome. Yeah. I wouldn't have the patience that she has. I would just end up blocking half of my timeline if I was her. But that is a real fact in what you all are trying to do in covering this sport that is male dominated, which is why I love what Denise is doing, right? There are some women on Fightful who are in there constantly. It's why I love talking to Lady B, because the way that the coverage improves in what we are doing is to have more perspectives and more voices. It's why Grapsity is such an important show in this ecosystem. Now, those guys don't have to hardcore cover, report like how BJ reports, right? Just the fact that they have a platform to talk about the art form that they love is important. And so, really shout out to everybody who is doing this. And BJ, by the way, being a white male, you are not disqualified from this. Because a lot of times people say wrestling is dominated by white males, right? It's not your fault that is what the situation is, but I'm just glad that there are more voices, because that is how we're going to get more perspectives on how things book. There's a crazy Twitter thing going on right now about how Triple H books people of color. And then there's stats going back. When's the last time someone of a male wrestler of color won a match? And, people are keeping track of this stuff, right? You're keeping track of this stuff.
BJ's keeping track of it. He just told you.
Which is
nice job.
I know a lot of people, I get questions about, how do you cover things? Is you're a straight white guy. How does someone cover things like this? And I go back to when this is where I can bring kind of a mainstream reporting experience to this. And I go back to when I covered we had a terrible shooting at a Walmart here where a young man named John Crawford was killed. It ended up being over a 911 call that was false. And obviously race was involved in this thing. And then I covered George Floyd. Had to cover both sides, with the police perspective and the perspective of protesters, plus the perspective of people that have been affected by this. And I think the best way you can do this is if you're just try to be honest, fact-based, and give your portion of your voice to people and allow them to speak through it. And I think Sam and you are very good at that, Mel. And I think Dave's very good at that. I think Garrett's very good at that, because when they're talking to people, they're talking to everybody in a locker room, which is a very, very diverse ecosystem. And And when they're doing that, you have to you're taking that in as part of what your background information is what helps form your opinion or your analysis, or just getting what their side of the story is. And if you're doing, because I get questions from younger reporters about this all the time, like, how do you do that as somebody who's this? How do you do that as somebody who's that? Especially when people are outright hostile. Sometimes if you're a straight white guy, because of the history to covering something, the thing is, you just go in, you be yourself, you be honest, and you try to do your best as you can. Some people aren't gonna. I mean, there's a million reasons why some people won't talk to you, but I think that I echo what Garrett says. I think we need more female voices in this. I think Power Bombshells is a very important part of that. But I think we also, we need these voices to really be heard, and really, especially at a time like this. We're starting to see a side of the industry that's been covered up for decades, and it's been there since the beginning. And people think this is all in a way, because society modernized. Well, it's obviously it's still a problem. So I think voices like Mel's and Sam's, I think, are very important, and some of the other women out there that are covering the sport, like you mentioned, a lot of people at Fightful. Just anybody, don't let the fact that there's a lot of guys and meatheads covering this. If you're female, and if you're a woman, if you're anybody, if you're black, white, Latino, Japanese, Mexican, whatever, don't let
or
that.
what about what The Rock said? Unicorn.
Yeah, whatever.
He is so God.
That was
so
so
told
silly.
on himself a lot lately, or what?
That was silly. I was disappointed.
It's because we're in the times of saying the quiet part out loud. A lot of people don't realize they just did that, and then when they do, they're like, "Oh crap," and they have to like backpedal and apologize and do all the things, and they have to co-opt words like cancel and woke, and like it's like, when someone says to me I'm not woke, I'm like, well, thanks for telling me exactly who you are then. So you totally. So we picked up on this thing recently, and it was like, you may not be like, where people are like, well, just because I'm a supporter of this person doesn't mean that I'm a racist. And so we found this thing recently and was like, right, but it wasn't a disqualifier. And that's the bigger issue. And that shows itself in, like, part of my reasoning for distancing myself personally, because I've dealt with this my whole life. I played soccer from the time I was 5 years old. So, and I know, I went through a period of time where I knew a lot about the NFL, and some guys can really, they love that and think it's the coolest thing ever. And some guys have the attitude where I told a friend one day, there's guys that say that they want chicks that dig sports, but really what they want is chicks that sit quietly in the room while they dig sports. And as soon as you start having a conversation, and I've dealt with it my entire life, is that, well, you're just a girl, you can't know anything about this. And it's like, I've played soccer at a pretty high level. I could pretty much name you every conference in the NFL, down to the it is what it is. And so there's some people that think that's great, and there's some people that think that's terrible. And this is awesome because Sam and I get to have those conversations with all different kinds of people, and we do get to examine these things about Vince McMahon. And it is finally coming out that, wrestling, we talk all the time on this show how wrestling reflects life. And they said it all through that docuseries, how wrestling is a reflection of life. And so now, was the Attitude Era family friendly? F no. That's ridiculous. Get out of here with that stuff. What are you talking about?
I gotta give Ringer credit. That montage of when Vince saying we didn't have guns or people getting stabbed or sex and stuff, and they just keep showing all this stuff. They show Pillman, they show Austin, and it's just like, I was like, okay, this is great stuff. This was worth watching this whole episode just to get to this montage, because it's like, it's the one thing you guys were talking about before I came on was the time frames. I thought were kind of, they keep, for some reason, WWE really wants to present DX as being this leader of this Attitude Era change, and their fortunes changing around. DX didn't really have much to do with it. It was really Steve Austin. And the whole Austin 316 thing happened well a year before DX was a thing. And he was gaining in popularity. He was kind of keeping them afloat. I mean, they didn't mention this at all, but he had a horrific neck injury. He was paralyzed.
Mhm.
I mean, and he kept working because he didn't want to. One, they needed him because if he wasn't on TV, they would have really dived bad. But another was just because he was afraid of losing his spot.
That's exactly what it was. Is
And
that term, losing my spot?
Lose my
yes,
spot. Yes.
today it's like I hear Dave and you and other people talk about how ridiculous this is because it's when you go away and you come back, you get a big ovation. Like they are going to bring you back. You aren't losing your spot anymore.
Almost to the point where if they don't bring you back and I had this conversation about Jamie Hayter because I really love Jamie Hayter. I think she's like has the possibility of being like top woman star in the business potential.
Yeah, I
And,
agree with that.
and they brought her back at All In on the pre-show, and then they put her with Saraya, and Saraya is in a comedy role. So they kind of mid-carded Jamie Hayter's comeback right away.
Big time.
And I was like, okay, can we like they did the match with Saraya on Collision, and that hopefully is kind of the end all be all of that. And then Jamie moves back up the ranks. And I get it. I understand all of the reasons of people who were telling me why it happened that way. I understand Jamie Hayter is a really bad injury. You kind of want to bring her back, and they changed her look. But if we believe what BJ just said, you bring somebody back, you need to take advantage of that. And they did not take advantage of it with Jamie. In fact, she came back at a lower level than when she left. And that's what I think is like, you had this opportunity.
I think that goes a lot to how AEW, their booking doesn't quite understand how this really works in all the ways that it should. I think they're thinking, wow, the pre-show is going to have a lot more viewers. This is Wembley. This is Jamie Hayter. People have been waiting over a year for her to come back. This will, and it's against Saraya Page. He's a huge name in England. The Rock made a movie after her. This will be a fan. Just based off thinking about it that way, it sounds okay. Well, that's a can't miss. Well, then, it would have been better if it was on Dynamite. If it had been better if she went after Mercedes right after Britt was done with her. It would have been better in a lot of different ways looking back. And I don't like, that to me, it's kind of not understanding booking that well. I don't know if that was done on purpose or that. I can see why the positives where they could see, well, yeah, we put her on a pay-per-view, but maybe we can get more people to buy the pay-per-view because they'll think Jamie will show up later during the Mercedes Britt match,
which she didn't.
Yeah, which she didn't, and that's another thing too. Is like they don't follow up well on these things. That gets into more of their bigger booking issues, but
No, I didn't. The Collision show last night with the Jamie Hayter Saraya match. You said it. Can we be done with this? I'm glad I wasn't alone in being like, this needs to stop.
That was a really dangerous match, by the way, too.
It wasn't just that it was. I mean, not just the dangerous part. Like Saraya just hasn't come back. I'm sorry you haven't, and what she's using to try and propel herself is really toxic stuff that she and her.
Were you surprised to see the extra year that she got?
A little. I mean, I don't think she's been the win that they want her to be, and I think that some of her, unfortunately, because like we were talking about, things have shifted. So it matters who you associate yourself with, and it matters like that your theme song is written by a guy that's just openly not a good person, and you're not these. Yes, you may not feel the same way as your boyfriend, but they also don't. They're not disqualifiers for you to date him. So
I don't want to vilify her for that, but
not necessarily. But
should have a conversation about how he uses social media, and maybe he needs
to
talk to somebody about how.
And I think when you have her in a program where she's clearly being dominated, like Jamie Hayter is so much better than Saraya. I mean, that match kind of like just blew the facade straight off of it. If you had any questions, essentially carried her through that match, and it was not a great match.
The thing is, this seems to be. I'm sorry to interrupt, but
No,
this
you're
seems to
not.
be a theme with AEW, and when they get somebody back or they do something, is they have a big return, and then it's like the Young Bucks. Then they go against Sting and Darby. They Meltzer driver Tony Khan, which turns into an NFL Films documentary. It's like this huge pub, but then they're in a feud with the Acclaimed for 3 months or 4 months. It makes no sense.
Yeah,
And
the
then that
Acclaim thing
heat,
can go to
it's like it's like
Max
you
is
got to read
so weird, huh?
you got to really read the room, and it's like, okay, that act's gone cold. Okay, we need to do something else here. And so all that heel momentum they had, they just became almost invisible on the show. And I think was Jamie when debuting against Saraya, you talk about the other issues that Mel's talked about, plus you add the fact that Saraya hasn't wrestled much in the last year because she's really beat up. And I think she was an asset in the beginning because she was kind of the first big name they had that came over from the WWE women's division. And I thought she was a really good kind of leader of the whole Outcast group. And I really wish we got to see what the original plan for that was, because I heard about it and it was very much it would have been much better than what we saw on TV. I think I think if Mercedes would have been part of that group, we would have got it, because she came in and basically you're gonna change how you book the women now. At that time, that attitude wasn't there yet, and unfortunately, we didn't get it. But I think you're absolutely right. It's just like, you're taking somebody who's one of your biggest, you should be your main eventing, and you're putting him in a feud against somebody who basically disappeared for a year.
And the
And
women's division is elevated right now.
yeah, I mean,
She sticks out in this. She wouldn't have maybe stuck out where maybe a year ago even.
Yeah.
Now she sticks out compared to all the the Mariah May storyline and the things that are going on with the Joshis that are coming in, and
Statlander, Willow,
there's
Mercedes.
Some of the best stories
Mercedes,
on
the Bucks.
AEW right now are around the women, and Jamie fits perfectly in there,
Yeah.
and Saraya doesn't.
You know what I think that how Tony saw Saraya is how WWE uses the Miz. And I think her role was to be the Miz all the way down to the stupid Saraya rules and how, it's her and Harley having to team up and so I understand the mentality. The problem is we watched AEW to get away from the Miz.
That's
Harley's better. Harley's better than, even Harley stood out more than she was cutting Saraya's promo for her essentially in that match. And even she was more, she stuck out. She was more charismatic in that, it would go Hayter, Harley, Saraya in my mind for that match. In terms of importance to not important.
I think you guys also hit on another thing. It's like we watched AEW not to watch the WWE style stuff.
Not to watch the McMahons, right?
And
you literally got away because you saw too many McMahons over the life of your wrestling.
Oh, if I never saw another McMahon again, I could die happily, let me tell you.
Okay, but the Bucks did just post a photo with Shane on their Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think I don't know what they could possibly do with him. I was trying to think of things where it's like, do you really want to be associated with that name right now? So I know Shane is kind of
he's the baby face of the doc.
He's like the baby face of them. But it's like, I'm thinking that, it would be kind of funny to have Shane come out and announce the Fox deal if AEW lands it.
That would be pretty.
There's ways you could probably use him as as a manager or something, but I don't think that's what Shane wants to do.
Yeah.
But it's like the booking wise and creative wise, it's like they brought in too many people from WWE to help out. And now and that was, those people were there when they were in 2019, 2018, when their creative was in the dumps.
Yeah.
And they were losing the equivalent of 1 million viewers a year. And it's like, okay, what it's easy to see the timeline of when things start going wrong here and there, and when booking becomes a problem. And another thing Mel said is like it's you look at the storylines. If you get rid of Swerve Hangman, the top 5 storylines are all in the women's division. I think a lot of that's because you don't have some of those people putting their hands into that stuff that were booking all the crappy stuff or had input in it. And because it's like, okay, if you go from Swerve Hangman, tell me what's the top male storyline in AEW right now that can out? Is it better than Maria Tony? Is it better than the Joshis? Is it better than Chris Willow? Is it better than Mercedes Britt? Even though that's kind of winding down, and Mercedes is going to be probably taking on I'm not sure who she's taking on. Yeah, she got Jamie back. Well, there's 5. I can't think of anything going on with the guy. I mean, I guess Danielson and Mox, but
That's the only
kinda
thing
new.
announced for Wrestle Dream, I think, is that match.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
and
the
it's
Mox thing is the Mox Darby, right?
yeah, Mox Darby and that's still kind of like it's not really that didn't really go the way it should have. You didn't come out of that thinking, okay, well, what did that do for Darby? I mean,
Oh God, he looks like the biggest jabroni of all time after that.
yeah, it's like I had a match just to get cheated and beat up and then jobbed out
and lose my thing, and yeah, just poor treatment of who should be your young baby face that dominates your TV. I am gonna cut out here so that you all can take over, but I do want to say 2 things. First, the reason why I think BJ is so important in today's wrestling ecosystem is because he is a real reporter for his real job, for his world, for his career. And so when you do that for a living, I'm sure the way that he sees people treat wrestling, he's like, how is this even like like people don't even treat wrestling with enough respect to cover it fairly. And so having BJ as a voice and as someone that we can actually help prop up even more, I think is beneficial to how wrestling is covered in comparison to how real sports are covered. So I want to say that as one. So people who
I appreciate that, but I wouldn't check your mentions after you get off here.
Well, I just block all those. I told Mel how I would deal with it.
He's Dave adjacent. They're on the AEW payroll. Didn't you know?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I forgot.
That's the whole reason that Dave was they cut Dave. Dave's the truth teller because he's on Tony Khan's payroll, right?
Have you guys been? I've been accused.
Garrett's not sharing any of that sweet AEW money.
Honestly, I don't imagine Tony is all that happy with what I say about AEW generally.
I don't think so.
Because I'm sure he listens to Wrestling Observer Radio, or he may not listen all the time, but I was actually told by somebody who, knows some people that, there's a thought that Friday show that I do with Dave might be a little bit more unfair for their taste, which if that is the case, I'm actually happy with it, because if a company is happy with the way that you cover them, you're probably not covering them very well. And so not to say that I want people at AEW to be mad at what Dave and I do, but that actually makes me happy because
you're getting into an old reporting axiom there, which is if you're not pissing somebody off somewhere, you're not doing your job.
Yeah,
and that goes in if you're doing podcast, radio, social media, whatever.
So
people don't like the truth. The truth hurts.
Or
they
just
don't like change. There's 2 things about people. They don't like change, and they don't like. The truth is hard. Like, to accept truth about yourself, about life, about anything is incredibly hard. It's
not to interrupt you guys again, but I just want to see Dave adjacent become like a hashtag or a thing to put in bios.
I've been saying that. We've been saying that forever. That's a big, because
Garrett Gonzalez
takes so much heat online about being like, so. And then Dave. Sam and I have often said that we're, Dave
podcast
adjacent,
host, Dave adjacent.
And look, at the same time, I understand that the word fan is short for fanatic. People who are really dialed into this stuff really love it, positively or negatively. So I understand all of that, but I just want to say, for the people who are in the chat who may not know BJ, if you don't, follow him on Twitter.
I've got your tweeter on here too. I'll show everyone.
He is he's tweeting more about this stuff than a lot of people are, especially when it comes to Janelle. I know that you reached out to her lawyer, and you were kind of surprised that you were maybe one of the only ones who did the other day. Like, support what he is doing with this case, because it is valuable. Brandon Thurston, John Pollock, Dave isn't covering it sort of online, but he's covering it through the Observer every week. He's not, live tweeting his conversations necessarily, but support those people. And the second thing I want to mention, and then I'll get out of here, which is, BJ, do you remember the name Lisa Olson?
Yes.
Lisa Olson in 1990 was covering the beat of the New England Patriots.
Oh,
She
okay.
went into their locker room,
My home.
and she was harassed
I
by
remember this story.
players because she was a woman covering the men's sport in the men's locker room. And the only reason I bring up her name is because had we had more of a voice back in 1990, the Lisa Olson situation doesn't even happen.
Yep.
But because the Lisa Olson situation happens, there's more awareness over what we are lacking in the coverage. So now we fast forward to 2024, and we should be in a much better spot when it comes to that. But it's never going to be perfect, right? It's never going to be completely fair. The world is not fair. But as long as we keep pushing that envelope, there will be more people who understand the inadequacies of the how things are covered, and why things are covered in the way that they are. So imagine, I watched the Trump stuff, and you have these MAGA supporters who don't mind when he is so negative about women in his commentary, right? It's almost like they don't care, and they're drinking the Kool-Aid or whatever it is that you want. However, if we had more people in leadership roles in that community, in that, political community, then maybe stuff like Donald Trump doesn't happen. So
Congress is still only like 1/8, I think. It's like 1/8 women. We make up half of the population, but I'm pretty sure there's only still like 1/8 of Congress. I mean, I'd have to check that. My most recent, it might be more now. We've had a few like females from random, like all places and backgrounds. Obviously, Rashida Tlaib, is from my district, and so she takes a lot of heat and people like her. But I mean, we're still not represented even governmentally, like on the strong. And I mean, people like the NFL have picked up on it, and I had to put that Daza fighting your mom about a sport. That's kind of how I've hardened myself to the fact that those people exist, and I don't care. But I don't. It's difficult, and I know that that's a thing that's unique to me, and I understand that it's not always easy for women to talk about it. So I hope that when Sam and I are doing that, and especially because Sam is reporting on things, also she is covering these things actively. I mean, I read these things because I want to be a responsible co-host, not because I'm really super excited about reading that lawsuit.
So my and the reason why I brought that up is because I wanted to say, amplify. As a guy, I understand my privilege. How can I help the cause? Well, I can amplify the women's voice where it needs to be amplified. Because when somebody says I have to be unapologetically, I have to handle these things unapologetically, what they mean is I can't really worry about whose feelings I hurt, because if that stops me from saying something, then I'm only hurting myself, right? So amplify those voices. And I also wanted to just amplify BJ, because he is somebody who is doing really good work. And so check him out and keep doing what you guys are doing. I'm going to bail out here.
They got Doug saying peace out. Thank you, Garrett. I really appreciate it. And I know Sam appreciates it too.
All right.
A great rest of your Sunday.
Talk to y'all soon.
See you, man.
It's just you and me now.
We finally got him out
with me.
I'm just joking. Okay. That was very nice of Garrett to say. I appreciate that a lot. I do think he's right that it's funny because when people talk about the Janelle Grant case, I do not think this would have been covered anything like this by the mainstream media 20 years ago. I think because of the Monday Night Wars in the XFL and the fact that a lot of those teenagers that watch that now they've grown up and now they're running media companies and they're journalists and they're running websites and they're running newspapers. Now that's become news. They understand the business a little bit more, and you can't get away with stuff like you used to. And that's a good
Thankfully.
thing. Yeah, thankfully. So I wasn't here for the first part, but I want to hear, what did you think of the McMahon documentary? Just really want to know your opinion on it, because I know that you and Sam, I often go to, not just for women's wrestling insight, but wrestling insight all over, because you guys understand a lot more what's happening in the business than me. But just, what did you think of the McMahon documentary overall? I mean, I'm going to guess it probably played differently for you depending on the episode and what they were discussing.
Well, I mean, obviously it's difficult. And again, like I was saying, I read the suit because I want to be able to speak responsibly with my co-host about the suit. And I mean, we've talked about this previously when you've been on, and I've mentioned this as hobby wise, because it was something that I was like wanting to do. I can read legal documentation and I understand government process. I went to school in DC for a long period. Like I was there. When they talk about the bubble of DC, that's a real thing. And yes. I know it could not, that's the late 90s. There's no way it's gotten better. Like it's with as much tribalism and pick a side, and when somebody even questions something, they start to call you a what about, or what about is, and it's just like, or what about both sidist or something. They make up these crazy, and then George Carlin would be rolling in his grave, like, because like they just come up with all these things about that sort of thing. But to your question though, is what I was saying to Garrett is I didn't expect them. I actually thought that they went in harder than I expected, knowing that they couldn't put out a puff piece under the current circumstances. They really couldn't afford to go kayfabe. This couldn't be a WWE Films documentary. Or book. Like, it needed to be at least sort of a Vice-like, sort of like, and they did a lot of letting him speak for himself. But to me, the whole thing all along, totally a cover your ass docuseries, totally a way of having what I said to Garrett early on was plausible deniability. When they launch in January and Badman's gone now and all of these things, and if something comes up, and I mean, God knows what the feds have on this guy. It could be anything from money to trafficking. I mean, it could be anything. You're covering the Southern District of New York, and knows how to party when it comes to crazy lawsuits kind of deals. Like,
this is not, and I've said this on every podcast I've gone on, Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, became the first mayor in the history of New York to be indicted. The office that indicted him was the Manhattan office, the Southern District of New York, which happens to be the same office, the same FBI, the same court, the same grand jury that's investigating Vince McMahon. It's the same office that just indicted Sean Combs. It's the same court that found Donald Trump guilty on 34 felony counts, the first time that's ever happened to an ex-president. Right now, Sean Combs is sharing a room, is what they're calling it. In the old days, we would call it a cell, with Sam Bankman-Fried, the Bitcoin fraudster. So this is a long way from being over. Now, could he not get indicted? Could this all wash away? Sure, I don't know. But the record of this office is when they go after somebody, they have the goods, they have the video, they have the evidence. and I think that there's this almost kind of, and you could see it in the documentary. They never mentioned WWE's under lawsuit by Janelle Grant.
Nobody
They don't
ever
mention that at
mentions
all.
that WWE's.
No.
Sam and I remind everyone every week that Vince is named in the suit and WWE is named in the suit. And you guys have done the work. You backtracked
Yeah.
and got confirmation on the names of who some of those executives, the executive number 1 and executive number 2 in the lawsuit.
I would get that. John Pollock and Brandon Thurston broke that. They were able to get confirmation through the representation for Janelle Grant.
And I'll retweet theirs as well. I kind of bookmarked all 3 of it. It was hilarious this week. It was like you, Garrett, John, and Brandon Thurston. Like that was like all my bookmarks were all of your stuff this week because of what was going down Monday.
Well, I apologize for the typos. It's been a bad week. But
I said to Garrett, aren't you tired of talking about this yet?
Yeah, it's well, I mean, it's kind of my job. I got a passion for it, and this has kind of been a story I've been waiting to have happen for 20 years. I know this stuff has been going on. I've been waiting for the media landscape to change. I mean, I know people have been hurt by this, and people involved in this, and
well, there's a little girl out there that doesn't have a mom because of this.
Yes. And there's a lot of broken people that have been left in the wake. I mean, the wrestling industry breaks and hurts a lot of people.
And that's the other thing too. It makes it hard to be a wrestling fan because when you say you're a wrestling fan and this stuff is out there.
Oh yeah. I mean, I quit watching for over 10 years. I watched one wrestling thing in 10 years. After you're somewhere between Eddie Guerrero and Road Warrior Hawk dying, those are 2 people I had contact with or interviewed or talked to at one point. I quit covering wrestling, and at that time I'd already moved into newspapers, and I just put it all behind me. The only time I watched one episode. It was when Bret Hart came back to WWE, and it was at the Nutter Center in Dayton, my hometown. And and I watched that, and I'm like, this is 10 years after the Montreal screw job, and they're still not over it. And then I saw that the other show at the time, TNA, which had just started to become a thing right as I was booking out, I turned to see what they had on, and it was like an NWO reunion. And I'm thinking, okay, this business is going to be dead in 5 years because they can't get over 1997, right?
No, they can't let the Attitude Era go. They couldn't for a long time. We stopped. We were living in Seattle for WrestleMania 14, I think it was.
Okay.
2004. Yeah. I think that's right. WrestleMania 19. It was at Safeco Field. It was like yeah. We don't bloody mutilate ourselves. Yeah, it's like one of the bloodiest matches in the history of WWE took place like right there in front of us. So and then we sort of
what match was that?
It was Vince and Stone Cold and The Rock, I think.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. That was like a year.
It was a bloodbath.
That was a year or two after they sent a note to WCW's advertisers saying that they were supporting mutilation because.
And they've even said that recently when AEW, same playbook. When AEW has done AEW things, well, we don't support bloody self-mutilation.
And then 6 months later,
that's interesting because I paid money to watch you bloody self-mutilate yourself and your talent.
Yeah, and then 6 months later, Cody's pulls a muta on himself in the parking lot, with The Rock. It's like, okay, guys. What brought me back was just my brother said, there's this New Japan pay-per-view. It's going to be on US TV. He goes, you really need to watch this. And I'm like, man, I don't really want to watch wrestling ever again. And he says, no, it's different. He goes, the guys we love to watch are now the ones that are on top. And the business has changed in a lot of these companies. He didn't mention WWE, but he mentioned NXT, how they basically had a whole brand that was dedicated to being like an indie. And I'm like, wow, this is different. And then I started watching, and I saw Nakamura and I saw Nakamura take on Ibushi, Shibata, Ishii. I saw some of the Ring of Honor guys. I saw the Young Bucks. I saw Kenny Omega in a match, and I was like, okay, this is something different. And then I started reading more about these guys. You realize these weren't the Carney guys from the past. The business had changed and evolved somewhat, and I've talked to a lot of people. They thank the Young Bucks for that, because they managed to be nice Christian guys and not lose that identity. Whereas before, if you went to WWE locker room, it was like almost a game to strip that from you. I mean, I'm talking too much about me here,
Hazing.
but it's just like to me, it's just like we're seeing these documentaries, we're seeing this stuff because people remember the things from the 90s and 2000s, and they want to follow up on it. And that's why you get a why did WCW, who killed WCW, even though it was a terrible documentary. There's still money to be had in that. And it's to me, what's amazing about it is that Vince, even though this was completely a papered, it was very, I'm guessing for Vince and Linda especially, the list of questions they probably wouldn't answer.
Oh
Would
God,
walk
it
out
must
on
have
was
been.
probably,
It's probably longer than the lawsuit.
yeah, I was gonna say the same exact
A
thing. It's
couple
probably longer.
volumes at least.
Yes,
There's
but
no
if you listen to, but if
tough
you just
crap.
ask simple questions, they were that Vince at times was a perfect example of somebody where if you just let him talk, the truth comes out. And he started talking his truth about how he viewed the AWA and what was different than what WCW did. That question was, you could tell he has a sociopathic mentality to how he runs things. Look at how he talked about his son. Well, if he was evil or mean enough to do it, he would have done it. That's what I want to see. Well, that's not a good thing, you know.
Well, it's like if you don't break the cycle, like you're essentially doing the shit rolls downhill thing. Well, I was traumatized as a child, so I have to traumatize my children so that they're
I'm sorry
tough,
to hear that.
which is insane. Yep. That's essentially what he's saying. He is saying, like, I was traumatized as a child, so the best way for me to handle my children is to traumatize them. It's like, well, right there, you've already lost me as a human because that's not how you're supposed to do things. And I have a background working with kids, so early childhood development. So it's like, I know how much influence. I've joked about this, but they used to have a game that my counselors and coaches would play with me, which was, Mel, what's wrong with that kid? And it was because I had spent so much time noticing patterns about how children behaved at like 3 and 4 and 5. And when they're that age, that comes from somewhere.
Yes.
They're not old enough to come up with some of the stuff that they say or the way that they act. It's like, so I would have little boys who would have trouble with female counselors, for example. And so you would automatically know from that little boy's behavior that at home, the women in his life are minimized. So he feels that he is empowered to treat my female counselor coach in a certain way. Well, that doesn't come from nowhere. They're 3, they're 5. That's modeled behavior at that point. So Vince is a toxic, horrible person who has been enabled and empowered. I mean, it was amazing when they were talking to him about how Ted Turner came in and poached all his talent and did all this stuff. And he saw no equating to what he did in destroying the territories. He saw nothing in his line. In Vince's world, it's not the same, period.
Yeah.
Like, it's this narcissistic thing. It's their world and we're living in it. He was like, he thought he was working the interviewers and it made him look like an asshole.
Yeah, he looked like the ultimate sociopath. Like he couldn't
totally.
It was like, what do you mean I should think differently about that? Why do you mean it was the same thing?
Dawn on him.
I mean, if anything, WCW did not raid them to the extent that they raided AWA or Portland or St. Louis. And what's crazy about it is like they not only raided them, they stole their television. They went in and got their TV stations. They went and bought their TV time. I mean, AWA didn't have
underhanded and sneaky and gross about it.
That was like mafia style tactics they used. And I mean, people need to remember too, with WCW, when they got Hulk Hogan, Hogan had left WWE. He'd been gone for a while, at least a year or so. And And then Savage had been demoted. He'd been a ring announcer because Vince didn't think he was fit. He could wrestle anymore or be a draw, which was insane. So those guys just wanted to work again. I mean, when you get to Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, I mean, you talk to those guys, a lot of it had to do with the fact they were sick of how the locker room worked. They wanted a fresh start. They wanted dates. I mean, Vince could have offered less dates. I mean, Vince could have paid more money. Vince could have guaranteed some cash. I mean, he never competed he was rated, but at the same time, he never competed to keep a lot of those guys like he could. And it's just it's so hypocritical, and it's just, I'm glad that's part of the documentary. I'm glad if the documentary serves one good purpose, it's that people got to see this and they got to see how he treated his own family when it came down to it.
Yes.
And it also got, another thing that was great was in the first episode is when they finally admitted, I mean, they didn't pay shit to buy WWF. Vince and Linda didn't.
Yep.
Linda was flat out straight. They had 250 grand they made from selling a little sports coliseum in Connecticut.
Yep.
And that was made off of money that he'd made working for his dad. And then they just took money they had from the company to make the other 3 payments. They paid $1 million for the WWF in 1983, which was at the time when that and New Japan were the 2 largest promotions in the world by far. And that's like the equivalent of then would have been like a couple gates at the Spectrum, the Garden, Boston Garden, in some of those big cities. Like it was given to them. So this idea that I worked this up, I made this a thing. It's almost like listening to Ben Stiller in Dodgeball. Just because I'm a trust fund guy, I built this with my own hands, not for my trust fund. It's just like that's what I think about every time I hear Vince talks. Ben Stiller,
Yeah,
I'm my own man. I'm not my own guy. Well, no, you're not.
Not even close. Not even remotely. And I do want to get to some of these comments here.
Sure.
Hey guys, just say hello. Hi there. BJ and the Beard, BJ and the Bear. Hi, Brad. Brad says that he always shares. Where was that? BJ is a great follow. I always make it my business to share his posts because of how important they are. And that is very true. And I think it's something that's kind of, I just want to pop these in here because I don't want to ignore you guys. Hey, Colin, welcome. This right here, oh no, where was it? The one that Daza just dropped on here is with the Dirty Tricks WWF pulled when they'd been deliberately long and when they'd put on long and boring shows to kill local market night before competitors' big show. Yeah. He called that free enterprise. I have read a lot of economics books at this point, and nothing in them says, and I mean, his obsession, and I think Dave talked about it with Garrett a lot, but his obsession with his legacy, I think that he thought, and I mean, of course he did. I guess I would go so far as to not even say I think. I know that because of this guy's mindset, he's never been caught before. And it's similar to Trump. I mean, the sad fact of the matter is that these people have done horrible things, but nobody's ever punished them for it. And they've had, I mean, some of that stuff should never have gone to trial, and it was BS, and they were trying to get him, and that's fine. But like the Rita Chatterton thing, it was a perfect example of like someone speaking like, well, even if I had raped her, the statute of limitations would have run out.
Yeah, what? Vince sued her. Yeah, that's a great defense. That's a great defense. Well, I'm not guilty because the statute of limitations ran out.
If like that that's normal to a guy like that. To him, he says those words, and there's nothing wrong with what he just said in his mind.
Yeah, if you go to SE Scoops and look up my name and go read through some of my articles, you will. I can't really get into a lot of the dirty details of it because it's a family-friendly website. But a lot of the things Rita Chatterton was talking about in '92, covering criminals and sex crimes and things and doing court cases is that it's like you said with child abuse and things like that. There's patterns, there's profiles kids fit. And Vince has a certain predator profile and actions. And if you go back and you start listening to stories from female talent, starting with Rita Chatterton, you can go back and you can hear things that are in the Janelle Grant and civil suit. You can go back and hear things that other women have talked about. You can hear stuff that Missy Hyatt just talked about recently. It's the same behavior over and over and over. And like you said, because he never got in trouble for it, it just exasperated because he thought he was untouchable. As long as I'm the last paycheck for all these losers in the wrestling business, they're never going to tell on me. And well, the problem is Janelle Grant wasn't from the wrestling business. Ronda Rousey's not from the wrestling business. EJ and Duke is not from the wrestling business. They know what reality's like. You can't do this stuff. And I was really happy to see that, some of these people are starting to stand up and say what's going on there. So, but
I hope that it brings people out. We always hope that.
Yeah. I want to really ask you a question what did you make of Trish Stratus and her in this documentary, especially when they were talking about her angle with Vince and
that's
Stephanie
some
and
Stockholm syndrome level denial right there. I mean, it's amazing the level of manipulation that this man, to me, I mean, that's indefensible. Like, be real. Like, you can't possibly. It's like the women who support some of the things that are like all the women's health things that are happening right now. And there's all these women that are defending it. If you go back to suffrage, one of my favorite things, I like reading old crap. And one of my favorite things when women were trying to get the vote, which still only turned 100 years old in 2018, folks. We've only had the vote for 100 years plus, few. But was some of the propaganda that women would pass out is like, what if your vote negates your husband's vote? And it's like, that's the entire point. The point is that I get a choice. The point is that I get to. So when you're doing that, you're essentially that's to me almost an indirect form of victim shaming. Yeah. I mean, if I'm a victim of a Vince McMahon crime or someone who's adjacent to that POS.
So what did you think when she says that, I refused to do something. I didn't want to make out with a certain girl on TV. I don't like kissing girls, Trish said. And then she says, well, then I lost the title the next week. Bye. I just will show up to work and they tell me I'm losing the title. Like, the little things like that is like stories that I've heard for years. Just, I mean, when you see that type of thing happen, does it amaze you that this has never like become a lawsuit or something before? Like, how's this gone on for like 20, 30 years and this hasn't been how has someone not sued this guy? That's what I'm thinking.
It doesn't, because if you go all the way back to Monica Lewinsky, if you're old enough to remember Monica Lewinsky, I know you and I are, obviously, but they shamed a young woman. The person who was the leader of the free world, this is the power dynamic here, had whatever he had with a 20-something intern, and they made a devil out of her in the media. Anita Hill, to this day, I mean, you look at the way people react, well, we have to do this and we have to do that. I mean, I remember watching those hearings as a younger girl going, well, this should just automatically automatically disqualify Clarence Thomas. And he is categorically one of the worst things on the freaking bench right now. Like, he's useless.
Yeah.
And he's on there, even though right in front of Congress in the 90s, it was laid bare that stuff, like the message was out to girls in the 90s, I guess, that, you can try, But there's still going to be a guy that did all these things on the bench, and there's going to be a guy in the Oval Office who made a demon out of a 22-year-old
That's a great way of painting it.
girl.
Like there was already this beating into you. If you're a woman in your 20s in the early 2000s, already beating into
15,
you
20 impressionable years. That were all my impressionable years. It was like, and I was playing sports, and I was getting all the heat that we talked about earlier in the show. And my dad was an incredibly supportive. He coached the women's teams, and he, so my dad was a good girl dad. Like, he did his best. Like, I don't think he expected to have 2 girls. And so it was like, what do I do to make sure that these women can coexist in the world? And I try to do my best to help other women, because unlike, like, there's a predilection for women to shame other women when it's like I was saying before, where it's like, I'm used to it. I'm not saying that like as I will stand up for a woman that I see getting messed with, because I can make a difference. There was an interview that you and I talked about with Medusa, where she essentially said, well, just get over it. It's the way it is. But she was essentially victim, and she kind of pissed on speaking out. And it was like, you're an enabler. Yeah. If you're that, because you're enabling the shitty, like, it was shitty. We all know it was shitty. We all watched it, but it's like the message was like pretty clear, I guess, to me, that if I was going to get anywhere, I was going to have to face that reality. And I'm a white girl, so I can't even, and I have to, and then that's real. That's real.
But it's, there's just still this, it's like the people that have spoke out about some of the sexual harassment, rape, and trafficking in the media, it's almost all been men from the 80s who were involved in the ring boy scandal or some of the sex exploitation.
Treated. It's so hard for us to come out. Everyone says, why didn't she say anything until he was running for office? He was on the bench. He was doing. Well, he's running for the highest office in the world, like in the country, or he's running for one of a lifetime position appointment. Like, what do you have to do? Like,
exactly. It's a great question. Brett Kavanaugh, some of the stuff that came up with him during his hearings, but it gets sent a message to anybody, even no matter the employment you're going into, that, if you try to fight the bosses, and especially in an industry that's so insular like pro wrestling, that's a good explanation. That's something I hadn't thought of. I'm glad you said it. It's just, it explains a lot to me, like why, you're seeing a lot. I think a lot of it too has to deal with the fact that, you're not seeing as many women speak out on it as I thought you would with Grant. But I think a lot of that because they're younger and they have children that are around. They don't want them to have to hear this.
Well, it's a scary time for girls right now, and women. Very
much.
It's scary. My governor, the governor of my state, because of the trumpets and such that went on during COVID, there was a abduction plot against and potential assassination
Gretchen
plot
Whitmer,
against her.
Yeah, they wanted to.
That's my female governor. Like, not.
Yeah, they wanted to kidnap her and then have a sovereign
and hold her hostage and potentially kill her.
Yeah.
What message does that send to women? The bear conversation, the bear versus the guy conversation that came up on the internet for all those times where it's like the bear's supposed to act that way. Like, that's been true for such a long time that I think even we, and I don't want to say brave because I hate the connotation that brave gets, but what Janel is doing right now takes an extraordinary amount of courage and will. And even Janel's Ann Callis, when you got her statement, talked about and understandably, things like suicide ideation. And of course, because she's been traumatized by this. And I think even Trish's response, and there's some people are talking about, like Dallas says here, what's thinking about Trish Stratus' argument was the crowd reacting so positively to it. But in a way, I think that there was some trauma with Trish. And I think for whatever, we don't know what her background is. We don't know what, men, but
The thing that got me with Trish was that she was a big star before she came to WWE.
Mhm.
Now she wasn't
Yeah,
on
she was
cable
a fitness
TV,
model.
but she was a fitness model, which was, especially in the 2000s, was a huge deal. And she was on a cover of magazines, and she was already doing that work. And it's like, if somebody who's already a star comes into this system, and they come into this business, or they come into this, and they're still pliant to being manipulated, harassed, hurt, it's just scary. It's like, what happens to somebody who's 18 that comes in on the ground, and they go to a wrestling school, or they end up in NXT and around the wrong people, which I'm not, I don't know, whatever the equivalent of NXT was, back in the years when it was developmental. That's what I should probably have said. uh but the people that back then, it's just like, and I've heard some things at NXT that have been bad. I mean, not
Well, if
to
you look
let
at
them off the
women's
hook.
wrestling in general, I mean, you go all the way back to like Mae West and what's her butt? The really bad
Oh,
one.
May,
The it
I
starts
know
with
who
an
you're
M,
talking
and my
about.
brain is doing that cramp.
Fabulous Noola. Yeah.
Lula, thank you.
Who's
And the fact
Jeremy
that she
Fine.
essentially
I
was
want
like
to
a
thank
man
Jeremy.
version of,
By the way, I want
she
to thank.
did like, I mean, essentially what anyone would say is like, she did exactly what is like anti-feminist, which is acting like a dude to
Oh,
get ahead.
she was the worst dude of all.
She
I mean,
really
she was
was
the pimp, basically.
she was a pimp.
Jeremy over at Strong Style,
This
you
guy
guys,
here who was seconding your golden age. I also got in on that act there.
yeah,
Go
Jeremy
ahead.
was leading the charge on Reddit to get Mula's name pulled off that tournament. So that was pretty cool. I thought that was pretty awesome, because they hardly ever change. Yeah, they ended up changing it to Honor May, who did all those disgusting storylines in the 90s and 2000s anyway. But it's it really infuriates me, you know, because it's like, if you're a decent human being, you should see this stuff and know it's wrong. If you're a decent human being and you're in a stadium, you should not be cheering this stuff. If you're a decent human being and you're backstage and you're seeing Ashley Massaro, getting screamed at in her face and terrorized as part of some like angle spilling coffee on Vince,
Because
where
she
was someone
wouldn't
should?
allegedly get into a thing with him. Essentially,
Yeah,
she would
he
lock
came.
her
They
door.
knocked on her
She would
door every
lock her
night.
door against the things that Janelle actually alleges in. Ashley would pretend to be asleep, or she's
Yeah.
like, I mean, same thing as in
There's
the
a lot
Janelle
of the
case. It's
Ashley.
like the wording. It's like you're reading the same stories.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't really go into the detail. I wish they would have had, I don't know if they had the time or not, but John Pollock and Brandon Thurston had a podcast going through the entire, I was able to get the investigation documents on Ashley Massaro and what the military found looking into her claims on being assaulted in
Yeah.
Kuwait. And they went through the whole spiel, note by note, letter by letter. And it was, they came to the conclusion this probably had happened even 20 years after the fact. There's enough to suggest that, I don't know if they put it that, affirmatively, but I mean, something happened to her.
Because they got an FOIA, right? They went in and
yeah, I got a FOIA, I got a FOIA, and I think Bix got a FOIA, and I was able to get that. I passed it on.
Did they redact a bunch of crap, or?
Oh yeah, there's a ton of stuff that was redacted, certain names,
But they
like
still
that.
essentially acknowledged that the possibility was there. That
yeah. And then, but John and Brandon did the real work. They went through this huge document, which in military, if anybody has seen, you've talked about being in DC, you know what documents can turn into. The military, it's the same deal. And they went through it word by word, went through everything, and they have a whole podcast talking about Ashley Massaro and what the NCIS investigation is. And if anybody's concerned, want to know the depth of these issues, I encourage you to go find that podcast.
Yeah, we'll retweet it again from because we do try and retweet.
Yeah,
all of you guys,
if I find it, I'll make sure to retweet it. But if you wanted her, if you saw parts of her on the documentary where they did, and they talk about her suicide, Brandon Thurston, John Pollock, they did a great podcast going over what happened in her incident, and it is a must listen, and it is chilling in some parts.
It's horrible.
Um,
That story
yeah,
is disgusting. I mean,
but yeah,
but again, this affects like multiple people. This is not just one person's life. And like you talk about, like even I think about things like that grand jury has had like a whole year of their life like interrupted. I
yeah.
mean, at some point the
Well,
government
they're
has
getting
to
together
like,
at least 2 to 4 times a month.
and also, I mean, maybe they were trying to sway the jury pool a little bit with something. Maybe they thought it would be good. I always say to Sam, like in some ways, I'm like, well, if this thing does go to trial or they do have something on him, well, at least they have all this video evidence of him saying the things that he's said and doing the things that he's done. Like,
Yeah.
they're kind of making her job a little easy because I say this every week is all this crap that they're doing, all these people, they're making all these statements. This is all admissible in court, guys.
Oh yeah.
All of it.
I will, just to tell you how this can work is that there's a former J6ers who's in jail right now. His name was Brian Bettencourt, unless he changed his last name again, but he was busted on January 6th trying to get into the Capitol. And one reason he was busted was because he had an ankle monitor on. He's not exactly the smartest guy, and he'd been threatening and stalking Amanda Moore, who's a reporter who's reported for several different magazines and has a great. If you follow me, I retweet her stuff all the time. But she was going into Twitter Spaces with him and recording what he was saying and the threats he was making, and it sent them to like the FBI and the attorneys, and this was all admissible in court. So everything they say, everything they do, everything they show, they can use it. I think that's when I first came in and I was listening in the background. I mean, you guys were talking about the Liv Morgan storyline and where they were kind of pumping in some of the reality from the Janelle suit and text like that, and to make it look like Liv was this aggressor. And it was obviously taken from the Janelle Grant complaint, which was insane to me that they would even do this. Like, but this was supposed to be only a Vince kind of thing that they did. Well, they all do this kind of thing. They think it's funny, the real life stuff,
You
and
have them
they don't care
defending
about the
it.
consequences.
I mean, you have them defending it in the
Yeah.
documentary. You have, I mean, I joked this week that, like Hulk Hogan's only lying when his lips are moving. Like, I mean, that's it just, but the
Yeah.
idea is like, I don't know. It's one of those things that I just feel like they've really kind of like, this may have been a calculated move, but maybe it'll work. I guess in the end of the day, if Janelle can get her suit before a jury and get that in there, no matter, and like Garrett said, if just settling is fine and that makes it, and she can go on
they're
with her
not
life.
settling. They would have settled for anything if that was offered. This isn't about settling.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I've asked them a ton of times for a dollar number.
And
they won't give me, and this is the only civil trial I've covered where I don't get a dollar number, or at least off the record from somebody at some point.
They want it in front of a jury. They want discovery. They want
this. They want this discovered. They want this in the public. They want this on the record. They wanted, this was laid out. The civil complaint was laid out to look like a criminal complaint, and everything that it was, everything. See, in a civil court, what happens is you go to the court and you say, I got injured by this person and I want to be made whole.
Mm-hmm.
So you go in there and they say, okay, you got hurt, this person hurt you, you make your case that they injured you, and then they come up with a solution like, okay, how do we make you whole? Basically it's how much money do we pay you? How much money does this person owe you for this action or this injury that they've caused you? And but if you look at Janelle Grant's civil case, her civil complaint, it is not civil. It is not the typical civil complaint. Everything that's done to her is listed as a criminal action, except for one, and that's when they say that Vince violated their non-disclosure agreement. Other than that, everything that they list that's happened to her is a crime, and a federal crime. This was done to set up to mirror a criminal action. which that minute I read that and saw that, I'm like, okay, they're not settling. This isn't about settling to them. Now this doesn't mean they won't settle at some point,
Right.
but December the stay comes off. This is happening. This is going to go to court. You know, they're going to have they're going to have some motions where they'll have a motion to arbitrate. And there's tons of laws that have just changed in the way that you can't just force people to go to arbitration by work contract, you know, especially in cases that involve, you know, sex assault. You know, there's like 3 or 4 new laws just the last 3 years that you can't do that. So,
well,
when
they're
this
changing
comes
the
down,
statutes of limitations all over the country in terms of sex
yes.
crimes
And in
because they
federal
need to.
yes, and in federal crime, in federal court, there is no statute of limitations ever. There's never been. They can go back to the 80s if they want to on this. In states, especially
That's
California,
awesome.
New York, and I think Florida was another, you're starting to see where they're targeting to take the state statute of limitations off. And now, if you go back from people that I've talked to, it was not a coincidence that you started seeing Vince paying 4 people off at that time point, because they could have went back to criminal court and said, okay, the statute of limitations has been removed for this. I want charges. Well, then you saw payoffs come out. But yeah, this has got a long road. This is just beginning. I mean, and I you know, I'm hoping that, you know, I hope, and, you know, I'm hoping it's not only changes the industry, it changes things for women in a lot of places, but we'll see what happens. But you know, the McMahon documentary, I mean, yeah, I mean, the ironical thing and the greatest thing, you know, I think it came from it was that it kind of gave you a piece of seeing what Vince would say on his own. I mean, you know, the guy's a sociopath, at least in my opinion.
I
And then you
agree.
also got, you know, I mean, you can't conflate AWA and WCW. The way, you know, stories about his son that were, you know, how he treated him, and then you go and how he treated women. And I didn't expect anybody to do anything I wouldn't do. And it's like, and then you get to the, you know, and I think the best part was you got to the ending and there's Bruce Pritchard saying, "Oh, you made Vince look like an asshole." Well, then it says very next day, here comes the Janelle Grant suit.
Yeah.
Haven't heard
And they
Vince
were
Bruce talk
very
about that
specific
once.
about how they framed all that stuff at the end there. And also, he walked away like they made the point, not just with the Pritchard thing, that Vince walked. Like, he said, "I'm done. I'm not doing anything else." I mean, he was trying to protect his legacy, and this happened, and he bounced.
Yeah, after the stockholder investigation, he refused to do any more. They had interviews scheduled after the stockholder investigation, and he didn't come back for any of them.
He
canceled all of them.
I don't know. This might be the time. I mean, this finally.
Yeah.
And I mean, the feds have him. I mean, I wasn't thinking about this, but somebody brought it up. You guys may have even been talking about it, like making JD or something. But it was talking about like, because I know some of the history of like law enforcement and stuff, and the feds don't like to get beat. And so they might have a legacy of having this in their craw. And also the other point that I always make is he made those payoffs with shareholder money. That's not money that belongs to him. And he was such a sociopath, such a narcissist, that he was like, I can do whatever I want. When you have like SEC and FTC involved, bankers don't like it when you fuck with their money.
No.
I mean, all the rich guys that belong in jail that aren't in jail compared to the one. What did they do? They robbed from other rich guys.
Yes. That's
and I mean, Martha Stewart. I mean, you want to talk about women? Martha Stewart is guilty of nothing more than what men were doing, stock manipulation. But she got caught and was a powerful woman, so she had to go to jail for 2 years for that. Like, but she was doing something that literally everybody was doing. And is continuing to do with this current moment with stock manipulation.
I mean, it's more illegal now when you got high-speed trading.
Way more illegal, especially since the meme stock people got involved, because they don't want retail stockholders figuring out their work. Yeah. That's why you've seen convictions on some of these people that were involved in the GameStop stuff. And then
but if the GameStop case is hilarious because it's like the company, the major firm that shorted it. If you look at the game, what Wall Street was doing to these retail traders You know, this is way off the line, but of what we were talking about. But it's just like,
But I mean, the
they were
point
throwing
being is
every
that
dirty trick they could to keep them from doing what they do on a daily basis.
Right.
And it's like, you know, what's different between some guys on a Reddit sub getting together and pulling their money together and what a hedge fund is? There isn't really much
nothing.
difference when you
There's
come down to it.
literally no difference. I
Doesn't-
mean,
we like GameStop. You know what? We're going to invest in
the
it.
difference is one of them is on the inside and one of them is a consumer, a normal human grassroots person trying to make a point about the fact that we're being manipulated at every level. So,
So I'm
but
gonna.
I don't.
I
I mean, him doing that still, even if they couldn't get him on trafficking, I still like they could Al Capone this guy. They don't steal from the. I mean, it might not be unfortunately the vindication people are looking for, but in the end of the day, he might spend his legacy in Club Fed. And
we're a long way from knowing.
I know I mean, this is you and I both know that
what's going to happen with Vince and just what else or who else may be tangled up in this. So we'll find that out at some point. You know, the federal government moves in decades, it seems like, but we'll see what happens. So as a
the raging speed of government, BJ.
So I got to ask you this, and just because I got to get going.
Yep.
And thank you for having me on. It's been great. I got to ask you this as somebody who got to do a little bit of film criticism and write for Roger Ebert's website a couple of times. Would you give the McMahon doc a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
Gotta be thumbs in the middle, honestly, because
thumbs in the middle.
I really didn't think they'd go this hard, but because of my interests and so forth, I obviously would want them to go harder. Not that I expected them to, but I would want them to. Because of the reasoning that I have about the idea that, to me, this is a big propaganda piece to get out ahead of what may potentially happen because they have to launch this product in 3 months that's got the same branding. I can't, because to me, it's like it wasn't made in good faith.
Yeah.
Is, I guess, how I would. So that's why I kind of have to go.
I'm trying to think back of when the Netflix TV deal came down with them, because that would tell you a lot about.
Yeah, and I mean, maybe my timelines are off,
but still, it's like you still air it in September, and you're airing Raw starting in January.
Yeah.
You know, obviously this had a lot of promotional element. Even if it hadn't started originally thinking that way, you would think it probably did in the end. But
because they need to cover their asses because they own this product now, for better or worse. That deal's inked. It's
for 5 years. It's a very backloaded deal.
And we don't. And I mean, Dave says it all the time. We don't know. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to get to your question, USVA guy, for BJ, because there's my horn going off. Unless you want to. If you have time to answer this real quick.
Can you read it to me? Because I can't read it on
yes, it says, what is your opinion on wrestling journalists withholding scoops or not investigating rumors based on those rumors possibly hurting themselves, companies, or others involved in wrestling?
Withholding scoops withholding news because it might hurt them or sources?
I'm not exactly sure phrasing wise, but.
What's this person's name?
USVA guy.
Okay, I would say that,
sorry about my horn there.
I think if you got the facts, you report what you got to report, no matter what it hurts. If somebody, that's how my approach to always being a reporter worked. In wrestling, it's a lot different because you're not going to get people on the record.
And then this one here is real quick. Venkin says, by the way, I saw something about Vince Kevin Dunn last stand against the documentary. And is this true? I don't know anything about that.
I've not heard anything about that, no.
That may be new news. Because again, remember Monday mornings or Sunday afternoons, we are the first and last people all at the same time to get things. A lot of times something will happen on a Sunday and we will either be on top of it or way behind it. that we joke about our ice cold takes, but I don't think that's true because again, we get to have you on and we get to have this conversation. And I'm probably going to wrap it up with this, guys, because BJ has been so kind with his time, and Garrett's
thanks for
kind.
having me on. I love coming on your guys' show.
Well, you are one again. You are an official honorary broad, so you are welcome here anytime. We use a lot of your work to talk about keeping Janelle in the forefront, reminding people it's not just Vince, but it's WWE. I mean, in the documentary, Stephanie making these like thank you Vince things. It's like, wow, that's trauma. That's ugly. So, and I mean, again, that speaks to the women thing we really talked about. But so I appreciate you coming on and hanging out with me and helping to fill very large shoes.
I think the way that you're able to talk about issues that have happened in mainstream society like today, and you and Sam are able, and she's able to talk from it and both that point of view and from the wrestling business point of view, and you guys are able to say, okay, this is why you're not seeing more women coming out, this is why you're not seeing women saying no to this stuff. I think that's so important to get that point of view out there, because it's like no one's heard that, and I'm just really glad to hear you guys doing it, and you're kind of leading the way on it. And I think you guys really have to keep doing what you're doing and keep focusing on this. I think it's very, very important. I know for a fact both sides of the court cases is going on are keeping track of what you guys are saying. So just keep doing the great work, and thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining me so much. Thanks everybody. Thank you, Daza. I really appreciate it. And so keep your eyes on the Powerbombshells Twitter. We will let you know what the schedule is next week. I will be at the Pennsylvania Renaissance Festival seeing my friends and families. Sam will have an honorary broad with her next week, potentially, but we will keep you posted, and we appreciate your time. Oh, as always, please subscribe. Oh, one more thing before we go. Speaking of Strong Style is going to be covering Destruction in Kobe at 5:30 Eastern right here on this very channel. So if you click the subscribe button and click the notify button, you will get notified of them coming on in a few hours. That'll be about 2 hours from now. They will be Destruction in Kobe, New Japan World happened this morning. They're going to do their review of the show, and I wanted to make sure that I threw that out there because Jeremy did ask me to do that. And he was in. Thanks you for being in the chat today. And thank everybody for being here. And thanks again, DJ. And you guys have an excellent, excellent week.